After a brilliantly cold winter, we now have a little bit more warmth in our air and in our soil, which means we can get some things directly sown outside. As we are nearing the end of February, hopefully by now we have already got some of our sort of staple crops in the ground, such as our onions and our garlic, because they do actually fare really well. And in fact, one of them really needs some of that cold weather that we have experienced over the winter months. Now that we are getting a little bit of warmth, don't be fooled, we could still be in for some cold snaps. We can certainly be getting some of the other things into the ground and directly sown. And what I'm looking at this week are things like our broad beans and our parsnips. Now ideally February is the best time for these in my experience, because actually they don't mind a little bit of cold, but they do need some nice warmth in the soil in order to germinate to start off with. So this little lull in the weather is perfect for that. So to start off with, I'm going to get my broad beans in the ground. If you haven't actually overwintered these, then don't panic. There is still time, and quite frankly, if you have sown some of these sort of in the autumn before we got the cold snap of our winter months, basically you're just getting a couple of weeks ahead from actually sowing them now. So now is the time to get them in the ground. Now I need to be thinking about my space, and sometimes I plan, sometimes I don't, but these are actually going to be in the ground for a fair amount of time, and I don't want them to impact on where I'm going to put some of my other crops. So these are literally going to be my border plants. So I have quite a few of my beds here where I know I'm going to have quite a lot of my veggies later on in the season, and as I say, I want to make sure that they're going to be happy where they are. Now I actually have these arches on my plot, which is where a lot of my really nice tall French beans will be growing. So having these next to each other, they're going to be pretty happy. However, I am also going to put some next to my onions in this bed. Now onions and broad beans, or beans of any kind, are not necessarily friendly to each other, but there's enough distance between where my onions are and where my broad beans are going to go. So very simply, all I'm going to do is just check the soil, and quite frankly, if you put your finger in it and it's not too cold and you can keep your finger in there for a while, it is actually a really good temperature. You're looking at about 12-15 degrees, but the finger test is actually quite a good one. So I'm just going to get my dibber, and I'm just going to quite literally pop these broad beans into the ground. And it doesn't really matter which way up they go, because if they're the wrong way round, they will actually rotate and turn in the soil until they are the right way round. If you haven't done these and you would rather put these in cells, make sure the cells that you put them in are really big, because they do like to do a little bit of a somersault. So making sure that I'm having maybe about 10 to 15 centimetres between where I'm sowing my broad beans directly, because actually these plants do bush out quite a bit, is a really good idea. So that's my broad beans to start off with, but I also need to be checking out my parsnips as well. So I've not quite yet made it down to the bed where I am going to be directly sowing my parsnips, because I've come here to where I actually sowed my parsnips last February. Now I've already had a great harvest, and in fact there's still a few which are lurking in the ground as well. But these ones here I am actually going to leave, because it is my parsnip nursery, and I'm going to leave these to grow so that I can actually collect the seeds for next year. Now quite often people think that their parsnips haven't made it through the winter, and actually quite a lot of the foliage on these did get knocked back during that really sort of cold snap that we had. But you can see that they are starting to come back, and actually if I just pull back the soil a little bit, you can see there are some really good roots in these. So these are going to be left. So I've got a harvest of my actual seeds for next year, but the seeds that I collected this year are going to be going into a different area, and that's what I need to do next. And they smell absolutely amazing. Now I am back down to where was my parsnip bed, not last February but the February before, and this is where I had my nursery last year where I've gathered all of my seeds. Now I am going to be putting parsnips in these beds again, but I have had to give them a really good sort out, mainly because this is where the polytunnel was fixed, and as we were fixing it, this got completely trampled. So I've had to dig down, and actually there's a lot of couch grass again in this area, but it's done me a bit of a favour in the fact that by clearing down in the soil, it means that actually when those parsnips grow, they're going to go deeper and they're not going to fork off into different directions. I've then given it a nice good topping of some fresh peat-free compost as well. And again, if we do the finger test, it is nice and warm. This is going to be great for actually sowing my parsnips. Now, if you find that when you do the finger test it isn't warm, you can of course cover this over with fleece, leave it for a couple of days, and that should actually create some nice warmth in your beds as well. So with my parsnip seeds, which I have saved from last year, we are now in 2025, I'm just very simply going to create some nice little trenches in this, and then I am going to sprinkle my parsnip seeds in there. Now you may be thinking that this is a bit too early, are they actually going to grow? And actually we need to think we are almost replicating nature here. And what I did have in these beds are some volunteer parsnips, these ones, which were still growing really well. I didn't want them in this bed because I want a fresh lot this year, so I've dug these out. But it just goes to show that actually when it comes to parsnips, this time of year is absolutely perfect. And you think it's going to be too cold, nature will actually find a way. So get your parsnips and your broadbeans sown directly in the ground. Forget all that faffing. It's absolutely the perfect time to be doing it now.